There is a phrase that every military analyst covering this conflict needs to engrave on their wall right now. Survival is victory. Hold on to that idea, because it is going to reframe everything you think you know about who is winning and who is losing in the war between the United States, Israel, and Iran. And before we go any further, let's be clear about something. There are no real winners in any war, but if we are going to talk about victory, then we need to understand what victory actually means to each side, because in this conflict the two sides are not even playing the same game. This was supposed to be quick, a weekend operation, a surgical strike that would decapitate the Iranian leadership, trigger internal chaos, and produce a collapse of the regime within days. That was the plan. 4 weeks later, nearly 5, we are looking at a reality that is almost the complete opposite of what Washington and Tel Aviv projected. And the gap between what was promised and what has happened is one of the most significant intelligence failures the Western world has witnessed in a generation. If you want to understand what is really happening in this war, not the version the mainstream media is packaging for you, then subscribe to From Report right now. Hit that notification bell and join us live Monday through Friday. Now, let's get into it. On day 0 of this conflict, the United States and Israel carried out what military analysts call a decapitation strike. The objective was to eliminate Iran's supreme leadership and trigger a power vacuum so severe that the regime would simply implode. That part of the plan technically worked. The supreme leader was killed along with several senior commanders. But what the CIA and Mossad apparently failed to account for was what came next. And before we move past that opening strike, something needs to be said directly, because it cannot be glossed over. 175 girls between the ages of 12 and 14, some even younger, were killed in a primary school on that first day. The UN Security Council condemned it. The UN General Assembly condemned it. The Washington Post was among the first outlets to make the accusation publicly, and the question that nobody in power seems willing to answer is a simple one. With satellite imagery, GPS precision targeting, and the most sophisticated military hardware on Earth, how do you accidentally hit a school full of children at the start of a school day? How do you confuse a primary school with a military bunker? The honest answer to that question is deeply uncomfortable, and the fact that no one will be held accountable for it tells you everything about how international law actually functions when the most powerful nations on Earth decide to ignore it. Back to the decapitation strategy and why it backfired so catastrophically. The assumption embedded in the entire operation was this: remove the supreme leader and the system collapses. What the intelligence services failed to model correctly was the succession. Ali Kham's son, Mohabba Kamuneh, has now emerged as his father's successor. And here is the problem for Washington. Mohabba is younger than his father. He is more hardline than his father. He has deep established ties with the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. And on the first day of this war, he lost his father, his wife, his daughter, his sister, and his brother-in-law in a single strike. Think about that for a moment. Every single morning when the new supreme leader opens his eyes, the first thing on his mind is not negotiation. It is not compromise. It is not a 15-point peace proposal. It is revenge. The CIA and Mossad did not just fail to prevent the succession. They handed the succession to someone more dangerous, more motivated, and more willing to absorb punishment than the man they killed. That is not a tactical setback. That is a strategic catastrophe. Reports circulating in major American outlets, not Russian state media, not Iranian propaganda, not Chinese sources, but American newspapers have now acknowledged openly that both the CIA and the MSAD miscalculated. They predicted that the initial bombardment would generate a popular uprising against the Ayatollah system within days. They said a week at most, then they said 4 weeks maximum. We are entering the 5th week and the regime is not collapsing, it is consolidating. Stay with us on From Report. This analysis goes places that mainstream coverage simply will not go. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Iran issued a military statement in the past few hours that deserves to be read carefully because it does not sound like the statement of a country that believes it is losing. Thrawn said there will be no compromises. Iran decides when and how a return to normality happens, and they specifically said do not call an agreement a defeat. That is the language of resistance. That is the posture of a government that believes time is on its side. And when you look at the actual battlefield dynamics, it is difficult to argue with that assessment. A professor at Johns Hopkins University put it in terms that cut straight to the heart of this conflict. For Iran, survival is victory, and that single sentence changes the entire framework of analysis. Iran is not trying to defeat the United States militarily. They know that is impossible. Their strategy is something far more sophisticated and far more patient. The goal is to absorb enough punishment, inflict enough cost, and hold on long enough that the political and economic price for Washington and Tel Aviv becomes unsustainable and their own allies start pushing back. And here is the thing, that strategy is already working. Let's look at what is happening on the negotiation front, because the contradiction between Washington's words and Washington's actions is almost impossible to explain away. The Trump administration sent Iran a 15-point ceasefire proposal. The details that leaked out were remarkable in their ambition. Complete dismantlement of Iran's nuclear program, full reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, severing all ties with Hezbollah, ending support for Palestinian groups, cutting connections with Yemen. In other words, Iran was being asked to surrender everything it has built over decades of regional strategy in exchange for the war stopping. Iran's response was essentially, "You have got to be kidding." And here is why that response is entirely rational. Before this war began, Iran had already negotiated on many of those exact points. Talks were underway in Oman. Iran had signaled willingness to reach an agreement, and then the day after those signals were sent, the bombs fell. The supreme leader was assassinated. The school was struck. Iran agreed to a nuclear framework during Trump's first term, and Trump himself walked away from it, tore it up unilaterally. Now the same administration is asking Iran to sign a new version of essentially the same deal after bombing the country for 4 weeks. Why would any government trust that? What guarantee could possibly be credible after that track record? Iran is not being irrational by refusing, it is being logical. But here is the part that makes the entire situation even more unstable, and this is something that the official briefings are not emphasizing nearly enough. While the Trump administration is publicly talking about peace proposals and ceasefire frameworks, it is simultaneously deploying additional forces. A new unit of airborne paratroopers, soldiers specifically trained to jump into territory and seize it, has just been announced as part of a deployment that also includes 500 Marines from an expeditionary unit already en route to the region. Read that again. Peace proposal in one hand, paratroopers in the other. Iran is reading that combination perfectly clearly, and they responded with what can only be described as dark humor, releasing what analysts described as a satirical video referencing the Iraq model of occupation, signaling that they know exactly what the paratroopers are for. Iran is not improvising here. Reports based on leaked Iranian intelligence suggest that the late supreme leader had prepared a detailed contingency plan for precisely this scenario, a US-Israeli military strike, long before it happened. What we are watching unfold may be the execution of a plan that was written years ago. Trump, by contrast, appears to be making decisions week by week, sometimes day by day. An analyst from Al Jazeera made an observation this week that landed hard. Trump went from demanding total surrender to negotiating a face-saving exit. That is not the trajectory of a winning side. Now let's talk about why Trump is suddenly in a rush. Because the domestic political dimension of this war is just as important as the military one, and it is being dramatically underreported. Trump has midterm elections in October and November. A prolonged, expensive, unpopular war with rising fuel prices is the single worst possible backdrop for those elections. Gasoline prices in the United States have already risen 30%. Americans are not happy. The feeling growing within the US military, and this is being reported, not speculated, is that American soldiers are fighting and dying for Israeli interests, not American ones. No ordinary American citizen feels ownership of this war. It does not feel like their fight, and when the body bags start coming home in significant numbers, that sentiment is going to harden into something that no amount of messaging can contain. Trump needs this war to end before November. Netanyahu does not operate on that timeline. Netanyahu's political survival depends on military escalation, not de-escalation, and that fundamental divergence in interests is beginning to crack the alliance open in real time. This past weekend, the White House rushed to distance itself from Israeli strikes on South Pars, one of the largest natural gas fields in the world, located in Qatar and Iran. Trump said publicly that Israel acted alone, that he was not informed in advance, and that it would not happen again. Think about what that statement reveals. The senior partner in this military coalition is publicly disclaiming responsibility for strikes carried out by the junior partner. That is not an alliance. That is two governments pursuing incompatible objectives while nominally fighting the same war. And every time Israel strikes energy infrastructure in Qatar, in the UAE, in Iran itself, it drives up global oil prices, which hurts American consumers, which loses Trump votes. Iran does not need to beat Israel militarily to win the political war inside the United States. It just needs energy prices to keep climbing and the calendar to keep moving toward November. This is exactly the kind of strategic depth we cover every day on From Report. Subscribe now, share this transmission, and never miss a live show. Let's talk about the economics of the actual fighting, because this dimension explains something that the mainstream coverage consistently misses. Every Iranian drone costs between $10,000 and $30,000 to produce. Every American interceptor missile costs approximately $1 million. Iran has an estimated stockpile of 80,000 drones. The math is not complicated. When the US intercepts 1,000 drones, Iran does not declare defeat. It launches 15,000 more. When those are intercepted, it launches 20,000 more. The interceptor stockpile is finite. The drone production line is not. Iran is not trying to win every individual exchange. It is trying to exhaust the defense systems, drain the interceptor reserves, and reach the point where the missiles and drones start getting through consistently. That is a war of attrition deliberately designed to bankrupt the defender, and it is working. This asymmetry extends beyond hardware costs. 13 US military bases in the region have been degraded or forced offline since this conflict began. The US is spending millions of dollars per day to defend installations, intercept incoming fire, and maintain operational readiness in a theater where the enemy is using $10 components to force $10 million responses. That arithmetic does not resolve in Washington's favor, no matter how long you run it. So how does this end? Because that question is now being debated seriously among analysts, and there are two scenarios emerging that are worth examining carefully. The first scenario, and this one is described by some analysts as the most likely near-term outcome, is what might be called a simulated victory. Under this framework, Trump announces that the United States has successfully degraded Iran's nuclear program, that the primary military objectives have been achieved, and that the mission is complete. Israel makes similar declarations about having eliminated the threat from Iranian leadership and weakened Tehran's regional network. Iran simultaneously declares that it survived a military assault from two of the world's most powerful armed forces, which it did, and presents that survival as a historic triumph. Both sides sign something that resembles what they were negotiating before the war started. Both sides sell their domestic audiences a version of events that makes it look like they won. Nobody announces a defeat. Nobody admits the gap between what was promised and what was achieved. The world moves on to the next crisis. We have seen this before. It is not satisfying, but it is how wars between unequal powers often end. The second scenario is darker and frankly more destabilizing for the entire region. If Trump decides that the political cost of this war is too high, if he concludes that Netanyahu is operating outside his control and dragging the United States deeper into a conflict that is costing him the midterms, he pulls back. America withdraws or significantly reduces its involvement. Israel is left fighting alone, a country of 9 million people against a nation of 90 million with no US bases to operate from in the region, no coalition air support, and an enemy that has already demonstrated it can damage aircraft carriers and down advanced fighter jets. That second scenario produces something that looks a great deal like what happened in Syria. A regime that survives governing over ruins under permanent siege, but surviving which under Iran's strategic logic, as we have established, counts as a win. And here is the dimension that nobody in the Western press wants to discuss openly, but which may be the most consequential of all. If Iran survives this under either scenario, China and Russia will move immediately to rebuild it, not gradually, not cautiously, immediately. They will arm Iran to a level it has never previously reached. For the same reason the United States armed Taiwan, to create a permanent counterweight, a deterrent against any future military adventure in the Middle East that Washington might contemplate. China has been watching every single engagement in this war, every vulnerability that has been exposed in US carrier groups, every gap in the air defense network, every drone that got through, every F-35 that didn't make it back. China is not involved in this war. China is studying it. And while everyone else is bleeding, Russia in Ukraine, the US in the Middle East, Europe drowning in energy costs, Japan and South Korea watching their military equipment get redirected to the Gulf, China is manufacturing, stockpiling, and learning. The United States spent decades building military dominance through projection of force. What this war is demonstrating piece by piece is that projection of force against a determined adversary fighting on its own doorstep, using asymmetric tactics with nothing left to lose, is far more costly and far less decisive than the doctrine assumed. The bottom line, and this is where the survival equals victory framework becomes most powerful, is this. For the United States and Israel, victory was always defined as regime change, the end of the Ayatollah system, the dismantlement of Iran's nuclear and regional capabilities, a compliant Thran. None of that is happening. None of it appears to be within reach. For Iran, victory is simply still being here when the smoke clears, still governing, still an independent state, still capable of projecting influence in the region. And on that measure, right now, today, at the end of week 4 going into week 5, Iran appears to be closer to its definition of victory than the United States is to its own. The pressure to blink is not symmetrical. It is overwhelmingly on the side that has elections in 7 months, a 30% fuel price increase, a public that never supported this war, an ally it cannot control, and a military strategy that is costing $1 million per intercept against a $10,000 drone. Someone is going to blink first in this conflict, and the question of who that will be and when is what we are going to keep tracking here on From Report every single day. Subscribe to this channel, share this video, and join us live Monday through Friday. The mainstream media is giving you the official story. We are giving you the full picture. We will see you in the next